It's one thing to say Trump's rhetoric isn't having much of an influence right now, but what if he becomes president? What would happen then? I'm joined now from Dallas, Texas by Henry To. He's Chief Investment Officer at CB Capital Advisors. Well, Henry, let's start there. It's a leap ahead, of course, in time, but let's say we get to November and there he is. He becomes President Donald Trump. What happens then?
I think if he carries through the promises that he's making, particularly the Chinese bashing, especially the anti-trade stance that he has, that's been getting a lot of support from his constituents. I think that's a disaster in the making, because China is the U.S. third largest trading partner in terms of exports from the U.S. It's the U.S. largest trading partner in terms of imports from China to the U.S. When you add those two numbers up, we trade about $600 billion a year. So every year you have trade flows totaling $600 billion across the border with China and the U.S. And so if that flow ever gets interrupted, a lot of people are going to be out of jobs.
Let me ask you this. I want to play some sound here if we can. It comes from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lu Kong. Here's what he had to say last month.
We hope that whatever the results of the U.S. general elections this year, the U.S. leader elected can continue to pursue a constructive policy to develop China's relations and to continue to work together with China to push for a new style of U.S.-China relations.
Trump has called for a 45% tariff on Chinese goods. Is that something he could actually really implement, do you think?
That's a really shocking number, first of all. Second of all, even if he can implement it, you cannot bring those jobs back to the U.S. because manufacturers are going to just outsource the jobs, outsource the manufacturing facilities to cheaper countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh. And second of all, he is advocating a complete revamp of the entire trade system, the entire global trade infrastructure. Now, when I was here in September last year, we talked about the Chinese devaluation, we talked about the Chinese slowdown. Whatever happens for the Chinese economy can recover from it because that's just a normal part of the business cycle. But if you start changing the global trade system by implementing tariffs like that, the last time that happened, we had a trade war back in 1930s, and then that subsequently led to the Great Depression, as you know, and after that, World War II. So I don't think that's a very good policy at all, and I think that's very dangerous.
You know, I spoke to former U.S. President Jimmy Carter in Atlanta a couple of years ago, and he talked about this campaign rhetoric. He said every presidential election cycle, you see all these people coming out and bashing the Chinese, but then when they get elected, they have to work with China. China and the United States have this symbiotic relationship. So I want to ask you about the rhetoric. What's the overall damage from this? And do you suspect that that's going to be the case this time around, where it's rhetoric during the campaign season to get votes, and then once in office, it changes?
I'm hoping that's the case, Mike. I mean, when you look at the rhetoric this time, sure, it's business as usual to some extent, but it's also very extreme. Now, Donald Trump is not the problem. He's just a reflection of what a lot of Americans are thinking right now. A lot of Americans feel disenfranchised. Income in the U.S. have been flat. Real income growth has been flat for the last 15 years. So to some extent, the American people are looking for alternatives, and the anti-trade stance is very popular right now. So at some point, even if Donald Trump does not get elected, because there's so much support among your average American, maybe not here in Dallas, maybe not in California, but at some point, bad policies, I think, are going to get implemented.
Henry, thanks so much for joining us from Dallas, Texas. Certainly appreciate it.